back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad that you're joining us for our show again this week. We are always glad for people like you who are interested in the issues that are happening in our city. So we're glad that you're with us each week. And if you haven't watched us before, each week we'll have someone on from one of the 9 cities in CCX's viewing area to teach us and keep us abreast of what's happening or what will be happening in the future. And from time to time, we'll talk with other people who affect all of our cities, and that we're doing it tonight. Now, I'm very happy tonight to welcome Dr. David Schultz from Hamline University. And a few months back, he put on a program called the Minnesota Community Assemblies in Brooklyn Park.
Correct.
And we're going to learn about that, but it's mainly involved in helping citizens to be more active and positive in their communications.
To help not just citizens, but residents of communities. Right. Correct.
So we'll learn about that and hopefully spread the word so more cities get involved.
Yes, good. My name is David Schultz, and I'm a professor of political science at Hamline University, as well as a law professor at the University of Minnesota. And approximately about November of 2015, I received a call from the Joyce Foundation, which is one of the big foundations operating in the Midwest, and they approached me about whether or not I would be interested in doing something that at that point was named the the Citizens Assembly Project. When the Joyce Foundation approached me, instead they said, what we'd like to do is something at the local level to see if you'd be interested in running these assemblies at the local level, not for a year long, but a much shorter period of time, and to also see if you could engage residents in those communities in terms of talking about some of the common issues that they share, and eventually coming up with, as I described it, coming up with their suggestions regarding, or the residents would come up with suggestions regarding what they would like the future of their local government to look like and what role they would have in it.
Right. Because now you were teaching people about the 3 levels of government.
Yes.
Maybe you can briefly explain to our audience
Sure.
what those 3 are. We can't cover all that.
Of course.
But,
well, the 3 levels are the federal or national government, the state government, and local government, such as Brooklyn Park. And in theory, all 3 perform very different functions. The federal government is the President of the United States. It is it's located out of Washington, D.C. They perform things such as military for the United States. They create legislation that has nationwide impact, such as the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, healthcare policy. The state of Minnesota, capital of course in St. Paul, they address issues of statewide concern. But again, our real emphasis was upon local government, upon reminding people or teaching them that what local government does are what I call the basic quality of life issues. It is local governments for the most part that are involved in doing things such as fire protection, police protection, garbage collection, running the local parks. It is paving the local streets, fixing the potholes in the local streets. It is plowing the local streets. It is providing water and sewer. In fact, I sometimes tell people, and my students hear this all the time, is that every time you pour a glass of water, every time you flush the toilet, you should be thinking about your local government because they're the ones who are responsible for doing those things. Perhaps the most important things that affect our life are what local government does, but most people don't realize that.
I think people aren't aware of that because we're oftentimes saying they affect you most directly.
They do. And it's also, again, the level of government where we have the greatest level of influence. Everybody, I think, would love world peace. Everybody would love to be able to solve global warming. Most of us have almost no ability to affect world peace or global warming. But we could do something in our own communities, in our own neighborhoods. We have the capacity to run for city council, to serve on local boards, to get involved in local nonprofits. There are a lot of things that we can do at the local level, and that was part of what the assembly was about, is to not just encourage people to envision what the future of their local government would look like, but to hope by the time we were done, in the case of Brooklyn Park, is to provide a generation of 45 to almost 50 new individuals who might not have otherwise been involved, might not have felt confident to get involved, but who now may be more active, maybe more willing to be involved in their community.
Now, there are different types of city governments. Can you briefly go over those? I think 3, right?
Well, it depends. We have a variety of possibilities here. On one level, we can make a distinction between what are called home rule charter cities versus statutory cities. In Minnesota, the vast majority of cities are what are called statutory. We should also remind people that all cities in the state of Minnesota are created by the state. That to use a phrase that we use in law school, cities are creatures of the state, created by the state. Their powers come from the state. The vast majority of cities in Minnesota, again, are statutory, where if they want to make any changes in their government, they got to get state permission. There's about 100 cities that are considered home rule, which means they have their own charter, which means they have their own ability to be able to define what kind of elections, what kind of structure they want for their local government. That's, again, slightly less than 100, of which Brooklyn Park is one. So that's one distinction, statutory versus home rule. But then there are some other distinctions. For example, we can have what's called a strong mayor system. Strong mayor is where the mayor has a lot of authority, where the mayor has a veto over what city council does. Then there is a weak mayor system, where the mayor is part of city council and in the process doesn't have a veto. And then there's variations of that, where we can have a city that has a city manager style government, where the mayor is part-time, usually, doesn't have oftentimes a lot of power, but the city council hires a full or part-time city manager who really performs most of the administrative or executive functions for the state, or for the city, I should say, pardon me. And so within those basic categories, we can also have a bunch of variations in terms of how local governments can be set up. Let's say it could be weak mayor, city manager style of government, all kinds of possibilities.
And people need to know that if they're wanting to make some change.
Exactly. One of the things that we found very interesting in doing the Brooklyn Park Assembly project is the fact that many of the residents in Brooklyn Park did not know that the city had a city manager, or what the city manager did. Many of them didn't realize that the mayor was part-time and actually a relatively weak position. Didn't know that the council members were part-time. So a lot of them who participated learned quite a bit of interesting things about how their local government was structured, how it operated, who their council members were, who their mayor was. They got to meet their city manager for the first time. So this became a tremendously exciting learning experience for many of them, who walked away on so many points saying, I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I didn't realize, whatever the phrase was.
So that's an important part, that cities could do this teaching too, couldn't they?
They could, and I think
or set something up in their community so that people could learn more. How does it really work?
That is true. I mean, most cities have websites. Many have Facebook pages or something else. But not everybody uses those websites. Not everybody's involved. And hopefully, what we've provided is some guidance in terms of maybe ways that cities can educate people. And again, when I say people, one of the things I mentioned before is that when we inherited this project, it was called Citizens Assemblies. And very quickly, we decided to get rid of the word citizens and use the word community assemblies. And the reason being, many places like Brooklyn Park, for example, there are lots of people who live in Brooklyn Park who are residents, but they're not citizens of the United States yet. They are new Minnesotans. They are here enriching Brooklyn Park, enriching their communities. And we didn't want to use the word citizen in a way that people would feel excluded and feel like they're not wanted. So we decided instead to use the word community assemblies so that it would be more inclusive. Additionally, we've had across the 3 communities, we've actually had a couple of people who were like 17 and a half, not quite, or 17 and a half, not quite ready to be able to vote yet, but they're going to be able to vote soon.
Right.
And in all other respects, they were eligible to participate. And we wanted to make sure that these were also individuals who felt like they could participate in the assemblies. Now,
do you have any examples of what came out of your Brooklyn Park group?
Yes, we do. For example, some of the recommendations were to convert the mayor from part-time to full-time. People thought that would be worthwhile to do, given the work that the mayor has to do. There were some recommendations in terms of saying that the city of Brooklyn Park should have some type of, I would call, for lack of a better term, a civilian review board to oversee the police department. There was also recommendations for changing the way that city council is elected. And then one of the more exciting, I think all were exciting, of course, but one of the other exciting proposals was the idea of saying that there ought to be a bunch of kind of community associations across Brooklyn Park, broken up by neighborhood, where participants could stay actively involved in their local neighborhoods. In some ways, slightly modeled upon what St. Paul has been successfully doing for many, many years. So there were lots of really interesting ideas that came up, as well as other ideas that the participants gave in terms of how the city could do a better job with outreach, with education. A lot of good ideas. We've put together the recommendations. Those recommendations are in a report that is on our website, but also at the conclusion of the Brooklyn Park Assembly, the participants in the assembly presented it to the mayor and to some city council members, and as we speak right now, some of those proposals are going to be formally proposed or have been proposed to the city, of which they will deliberate, and hopefully some of those ideas will be accepted, or some variation of them will be given serious consideration, and perhaps change a little bit what Brooklyn Park does.
Well, and this whole Northwest area is gradually becoming more and more diverse, and it needs to do it in a positive way, and that whole process would help.
It did. It would. The process, I think, was good in the sense that it wasn't like when we watch cable news shows where you have people shouting at one another, fighting, nobody can get along. I think one of the defining characteristics we saw in Brooklyn Park was how enthusiastic and engaged people were, and how they saw that even if they lived in a different part of the community, came from a different background, different culture, they perceived and saw some common interests, some common concerns, and came up with proposals, came up with ideas that they felt really reflected the collective needs of the community.
Then that sort of leads right into something that a basic part of your work was in clarifying the values and having people go through that. And that's sort of like a general term. Maybe you can give some specificity to it.
Sure. When we talk about values, for example, to what extent do people say that one of their values in local government is transparency in terms of or openness for decisions? Another value might be something in terms of inclusiveness. Another value might in terms of getting more people involved. Another value might be in terms of wanting to improve the efficiency of city operations. There are quite a few values. And one of the things that we push people to do is to say, if you're thinking about creating a set of recommendations for how you would like Brooklyn Park or other communities to look like, we need to start with values. What are the most important values that you want your local government to achieve? Is it to be more inclusive? Is it to be more efficient? Is it to be more transparent? Again, some of the recommendations here. And that's what we wanted to start with. Because if we start with saying, what are the values that are important to you? We then could have people look at whether or not the current way they elect people, the current way the local government is set up, do those elections best achieve the values that you want to maximize, or do you think that a different set of institutions, a different election process, a different configuration for City Hall would better achieve those values?
So how did people, how did you get to that with the individual people? What process?
Well, the Wilder, which is located in St. Paul, the Wilder Foundation also served as one of our partners in terms of being the facilitator. And they are experts, very, very good in terms of working with people to get them to talk together, to work together. This is, now I'm a great facilitator, I hope, when it comes to working with my students, and I know how to work in a classroom, but I'm not necessarily the best in terms of facilitating very big, diverse, groups and communities. Wilder's an expert in that area. So they had some expertise and exercises in terms of knowing how to do certain kind of activities, just to get people comfortable with one another. So part of it really was on the very first day, I always call it teaching to collaborate. Teaching people how to listen to one another.
Good idea.
Teaching people how to peacefully and civilly agree or disagree. But then it was combining learning those techniques along with, again, education about levels of government, what government does, along with providing lots of opportunity for people to give and receive feedback and talk to one another. That became part of what the assembly was about. It was, again, creating that educated environment that made it possible for people to not just talk, but listen. Many, many years ago, one of my professors, Ben Barber, who just unfortunately passed away last year, wrote a book called Strong Democracy. And what Ben Barber said in that book was that we live in a noisy democracy where we have lots of things that grab our attention or pull at our attention. And we live in a democracy where everybody's talking, but not too many people are listening. And he talked all about how do we build structures, how do we build arrangements that make it possible for people to talk, but more importantly, to listen to one another. So I think a lot of what we did in the assembly was not just encouraging people to talk, but teaching people how to listen. Teaching people how to do active listening, actively engaged listening, and from that, learn how to respond and figure out ways of I guess, cooperating together.
Well, then they were gaining some very good skills that are needed out in our community.
It is. And that's one of the things that we should also stress here, is that what we did in these assemblies is not just something that will benefit them politically or benefit them in terms of working with government, but in many ways, some of the skills about listening, about engaging, about working with others are tremendous skills to have probably across public, private, and nonprofit employment and in lots of different areas.
So there's a seed group of people in Brooklyn Park and in Red Wing and Wilmer that have some new skills that they can spread throughout their city.
That's what we're hoping. We're hoping it becomes infectious. And what I mean by infectious is that these are individuals who, you're right, will now talk to others and say, here's what we learned, who will now get some of their more some of their friends more engaged also. So this becomes the seed, the catalyst,
Right,
we hope,
right.
for getting, again, more and more people involved. And one of the things that we want to stress here, the assembly wasn't just about getting people involved for 8 days, walk away,
Right,
nothing happens
right.
again. This is about training people to feel equipped, to feel like they have the tools and wherewithal beyond the assemblies to stay involved in
Right.
their community.
Right. Yeah, because the community is so much stronger when people are
It
active.
is. It is much stronger. That many, many years ago, when I worked in City Hall back east, before I got my job, I worked on a campaign for the woman who was running for
Okay.
mayor. And the slogan that we came up with for her campaign was something really simple that said, "A city is its people." And it's more than a political slogan, it's true. A city really is its people.
Right.
A city thrives upon the strength of the residents who participate. Brooklyn Park, all the communities that we worked with, are only richer, are only stronger when residents are engaged
Right.
politically, when they provide information. If the city is thinking about trying to do an economic development plan, if it wants to build a new park, if it wants to do whatever it is, elected leaders only have so much information.
Right.
They could make better choices the better informed they are, and they're better informed when more and more of their residents can be involved in providing information. What we really wanted to do here, again, there's several ways I've described
Right.
tonight, is to give each resident a seat at democracy's table.
Then another whole area that was covered was about asset learning about the connections in the community, the resources, and mapping the assets of your community.
Yes, there's an academic phrase that says that part of what makes community strong is and part of what gives people oftentimes ability to have influence is what's called social capital. It is the interpersonal connections. It is the knowledge. It is the relationships that we develop.
Right.
And part of what the Brooklyn Park Assembly did was to get people to think about what are the different assets that individuals have in their community. What are the connections? Who do they know? What kind of resources do they have to get involved? What are the other community groups that are out there? Because assets or governance or influence is not just about the government. It's about the nonprofits that may be there. It may be about some of the businesses that are locally owned and locally committed. We were hoping that after the assembly, even if people didn't get involved in local government, maybe they'd get involved in what? Volunteering for a nonprofit.
Right.
They might get involved in volunteering for, who knows, whatever it may be. But we would be increasing their social capital, increasing their resources to be involved, and contributing that to Brooklyn Park.
And then that part would go a long ways in increasing your confidence.
It would.
If you've taken the time with other people to gather and say, that people wouldn't even be aware of some of the things if you didn't have a group of people.
Exactly. There's the social solidarity of being involved with others. There is a lot of sociological literature. I got to put my academic hat on once in a while, but there's a lot of sociological and psychological literature out there that says that, guess what? We learn by doing. When we get engaged, we feel more confident, we learn about things, we become educated, and hopefully it sort of transforms how we think about the world. So that if the assemblies are the first step in the process of training people, once they get involved, they learn new things, they work with others, they talk with others. To what extent does this process now really not just help these individuals who participated, but does it now carry over to other individuals in the community?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any follow-up things that you're thinking of doing after a period of time?
Well, a couple. I mean, first off, one of the things our grant doesn't allow us to do is to get involved in advocacy. So, we as a grant cannot be now involved in the process of actually advocating for any of the things.
What they want, what that particular city came up with.
Exactly. But what we are hoping to do at some point is to maybe get some people from all the different assemblies, some representatives together, and sort of meet and talk about what their different experiences were across the 4 assemblies. We would like at some point maybe to be able to, I'm not sure if the word is called a reunion or something like that, maybe to do some kind of small reunion or something where we get people back together who participated in the assembly and find out what are they doing now, how has it changed how they've thought about local politics. But yeah, we're hoping that there is obviously a residual effect, a long-term effect that goes beyond simply the participation in the assemblies.
And maybe I thought we'd end up with a little bit about what has led us to this highly partisan area and how this can lead us in another direction.
The longer-term answer is to say that over the last 40 years, we can actually chart out in a series of graphs and a series of public opinion data how at one time American public opinion was a bell curve, that the vast majority of people were towards the center in terms of their opinions, some extremists on both sides. And what we've seen over time is that bell curve almost looked like a camel's hump, where the number of people who consider themselves moderates, the number of people who consider themselves kind of swing, has dramatically gone down. A consequence of I would say, changes in generations, changes in the economy, changes in the way the parties are set up. And as a result, we are now at a situation where we really do live in 2 different worlds. The way I like to describe that now is that Democrats and Republicans are not just 2 different parties. They shop in different places. They buy different cars. They watch different news. They eat in different restaurants. They live in 2 separate worlds in ways that we haven't seen in a long time, making it very difficult for people who live in their own separate bubbles to figure out how to talk to one another. So if anything, what we're trying to do is get people out of their bubbles, get people to talk to people who are not just looking at the world like they are, and seeing if there's some kind of way that this process of the assemblies really can help overcome polarization.
I want to thank you so much.
Of course.
And then if any of the areas we talked about stimulated an interest with you, then contact David Schultz.
Correct. Thank you. Thank you very much.